Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the final day of the Sacred Trust Talks and Book Signing event presented by the Gettysburg Foundation and Gettysburg National Military Park. I hope you're all dry and recovered from... No, I'm not. I'm still wringing my socks out. We are pleased to collaborate with the Foundation to invite renowned Civil War historians, authors, National Park Service rangers, licensed battlefield guides, and experts to participate in the Sacred Trust to share their unique perspective with our visitors. Our first speaker today is Mr. Matt Atkinson, a man who needs no introduction. He will discuss politician, lawyer, judge, and member of Mississippi's Ordinance of Secession Drafting Committee, Hugh Reid Miller, who served as colonel of the 42nd Mississippi at Gettysburg. Mortally wounded during Pickett's charge, his death began an odyssey to bring his mortal remains back home. Matt Atkinson is a native of Houston, Mississippi, and has been employed at Gettysburg National Military Park for 19 years. He is currently working on a book about the Vicksburg campaign. Matt's passion is the Civil War, and he counts himself very lucky to make a living at a hobby at the epicenter of it all, Gettysburg. Please join me in welcoming Ranger Matt Atkinson.
I want y'all to know now, I'm a little bit shorter than Chris, so we gotta do something here. I want y'all to know that I liked Elvis before the movie, okay? There you go. But I'm still not the biggest Elvis fan, but... All right. This has been quite a rush. The anniversary week for the staff here at Gettysburg National Military Park. Leading up to it, it's things, as you know from your own life, as you get closer and closer to a deadline, things get more and more hectic, And I finished that tour literally. I went out with a friend of mine, Michelle. We went out the evening of July 1st and walked that Barksdale walk talk that we did yesterday. And so I went home and I lay in bed and it's 11 o'clock and I'm reading those notes and everything. This PowerPoint, which I'm about to present to you, some would argue myself that I possibly worked harder on this than I did that Barksdale. And if you want to make a cheeky joke about it, I guess that's fairly apparent right here if you watch the Barksdale walk right there. But I don't know. I just found the story of Hugh Reid Miller to be compelling. And I guess that the reason for that is in part because I now have kids myself. And a lot of you, majority of you probably have kids or have grown children or whatever, some grandkids probably. It changes your life. It changes your perspective on how you look at things. I mean, you value life in a totally different vein or so forth. And so when I was rummaging through, I forget why I was in there, but I was in the 42nd Mississippi folder here at the park, and I ran across this batch of research that was put together by one of the descendants of Hugh Reid Miller and our former librarian who is giving us, the park, and future generations of Rangers, a lasting legacy. A gentleman by the name of John Heiser was good enough to save this stuff. And the documents which we have, what I'm saying is we have a fantastic research center. And I know it dates back before John, and it will go after John right there. But he did a phenomenal amount of work while he was here. And one of the things that he accessioned is the word, were the papers or the documents of this program you're about to see. So anyway, to wrap up the introduction here, the 15-minute introduction, old Matt's about out of gas. Well, I'm going to empty whatever I got left in the tank, okay? And give it all to you. I have this little thing right here. the kids and I went to Mississippi a couple weeks ago, right over there, and they presented me with a Father's Day gift in Fairfield, Virginia, at a service station, filling station. Now, you don't hear that too much anymore. And I opened it up, and it turned out to be this, yes, it's called a what? Necklace fan. Okay, did you want to come up here and describe it? No, you didn't want to come up here and... So much for that. But anyway, they said, Daddy, we want you to be cool. And they don't know why that's funny, right here. So if you turn it on, what it does, it's got a fan in it, and it blows air up. Right here. Yeah, what do you think of that? Huh? No? Oh, the small things that entertain people nowadays, right? So anyway, that's what I'm wearing here today. So let's get this train rolling. If I can get myself focused here. All right, so on July 4th, 1863, I don't know if you can read that, but when I found this note on the internet putting this program together, I about fell out of my chair. I said, lo and behold, my God, there's the original document. There are only 2 messages that at least I know of. Maybe somebody knows more, but I did a quick cursory glance of the official records, and this is not even in the official records. I could only find two messages from Robert E. Lee to George Meade in the aftermath of the battle. And to start the story of Hugh Reid Miller, this is one of the messages. So right out of the bat, I'm like, the commanding general of the Army of Northern Virginia has got time or places enough importance to write this letter in the midst of all the things he's got going on at the moment. And I was like, my gosh, who was Hugh Reid Miller? So on July 4th of 63, in the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee wrote this letter. And it says, if you can't read it, the son of Hugh Miller, 42nd Regiment Mississippi Volunteers, who was wounded and taken prisoner in the engagement of yesterday, this is July 4th, as I said, is very anxious to learn of his father's condition. Any information you may be able to furnish concerning the fate of Colonel Miller will be thankfully received. I am, General, respectively, your obedient servant, R.E. Lee. So who is this guy? So Hugh Reid Miller is born in Abbeville, in the Abbeville district of South Carolina on May 14th of 1812, which would make him a little over 50 years old here at the Battle of Gettysburg. He attended Baker School in Abbeville and in 1831 enrolled at the South Carolina College in Columbia, South Carolina. He graduated in 1833 with his A.B. degree. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but A.B. degree, and returned to Abbeville in the fall of that year to study law, becoming clerk to future South Carolina Governor Patrick Noble. And once again, I always like to have first here at the battlefield of Gettysburg. I assure you that this is the first time in the history of Gettysburg National Military Park that there has been a picture of Governor Patrick Noble displayed. I swear to God, right there. In mid-1835, Miller briefly resided in Selma, Alabama, but after that, he went to North Mississippi. And if I say Mississippi, you will excuse me. It's an old habit. The area had just been acquired from the Chickasaw Indians, which is actually the name of my hometown county, right there. But he settled in the county above, which is Pontotoc County. If you ever were to go home with me, you will see all kind of Indian names all across the landscape, especially the streams and so forth. Some of them are very odd to pronounce. And when he moved to Pontotoc, he established his own law practice. Now, Miller ended up marrying Susan Gray Walton of Cotton Gin Port, Monroe County, which is basically to the east of Pontotoc County. On May 9th of 1839, the couple had their first son, George, on July 26th of 1840. And Miller was elected to the Mississippi House of Representatives, the state representative, in 1841 as a Whig. I mentioned the Whigs yesterday, if you were paying attention. A year later, the Millers had a second son, Edwin Hugh, and his father, Hugh Reid Miller, finished his term in the legislature and returned to his law practice in 1843. Now, remember these two sons. And remember the dates that I'm telling you, because this is 1840 and 1843 when their first two sons are born. And so what you need to figure out right now is do a little math. What is 1860 minus 1840? And that makes them at the time of the Civil War what age? Military age. All right, you see this setting up now? Okay, all right. So, in July of 1845, look, let me go ahead. I didn't have a picture. What do you want? So I typed in judge. I told you I worked hard on this program now. In July of 45, Miller successfully ran for circuit judge of the 7th District of Mississippi. And in 1851, while still a sitting judge, Miller ran as a Southern rights candidate to a state convention of Southern states. The Southern states kept trying to get these conventions together. A lot of them were actually industrial conventions, where the South, of these leaders throughout the South, were trying to get an nascent industrial movement going to get away from the agrarian structure, of course, that we all know the South was bonded to. And but anyway, he held the judgeship for 8 years and then returned to private practice. In 1854, Miller also helped organize the Pontotoc Male Academy and served as local counsel to both the Mississippi Central Railroad and the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. On the 1860 census, Miller was listed as both a farmer and an attorney, with both a Lexus and a BMW. I don't have a picture of his house. So I typed in house, and I thought, well, if I was Hugh Reid Miller, I would live in that. Hope you find this funny. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. Give me a break here. These are the jokes. His personal estate, though, was valued at $19,000, which is not a small sum, to say the least. Miller was elected as a delegate from Pontotoc County to the Mississippi Secession Convention on December 20th of 1860. His brother, Andrew Miller, was elected from Tunica County. So you're talking about a family who obviously is very well placed in politics. And I'm not telling you anything you hadn't already figured out. He's a lawyer. So obviously, therefore, he can read and write. And your educated people will be the people which we take for granted today, which would not be back then. You would have richer people being elected to the secession convention. Always remember, folks, when they had these secession conventions, there was never a up and down vote on whether to go in and out. They had votes on electing delegates to go there. So anyway, he's elected, and I couldn't believe I found this. This is the paper that arrived with him at the Mississippi Secession Convention, authorizing him or telling the president that he was duly elected. Now, Miller went on to be one of the committee of 15 who drafted the Ordinance of Secession. This is the old Capitol in Jackson, Mississippi. This is where the Secession Convention would have taken place. I couldn't do the whole talk, as you well know, on the Secession Convention. I did go through, though, and I can't, because our focus is something else today. I did go through the papers, though, the whole minutes, if you will, of the Secession Convention, And Miller is in there. I was looking for any tidbits. I mean, kind of a flavor of the guy. What were his arguments? He's not really popping up a lot, and I had to be careful not to get his brother mixed up with him. But he obviously was good with the pen because they put him on this committee of 15 who drafted the Ordinance of Secession. Now, I couldn't figure out the Ordinance of Secession. I'm splitting hairs right here. The Ordinance of Secession is different from the Declaration of the Causes. So you keep shaking your head, Al. Thank you. I know I'm right. So I don't know if he was on that. I don't know. He could be. He could not be. But I'm getting deep in the weeds. So around this time of the convention, Miller organized the Pontotoc Minutemen. And if you're wondering, this is no relations, but this is a member of the Pontotoc Minutemen, a known soldier, and was elected captain of the unit. It was mustered into service as Company G of the 2nd Regiment of Mississippi Infantry on April 30th, 1861. So you were talking within like a little over 2 weeks after the firing on Fort Sumter. Miller's already ready to go. At the First Battle of Manassas, Miller was near General Bernard B. when he was killed. Probably heard, when I need not tell you, Bernard B. gives Stonewall Jackson his nickname. There stands Jackson like a Stonewall. Let us go to their aid, or rally behind the Virginians, whichever version you like. A year later, the 2nd Regiment was reorganized when many enlistments expired, and Miller lost the captaincy of this unit. He ran for colonel also, but came in third behind second place. Second place in the election was Colonel William C. Faulkner, who was the great-grandfather of the future author, who we all know. And first place came in as John Stone, and he became the colonel of the 2nd. And if you ever see the Mississippi Confederate monument on the grounds of the old Capitol, this is the state monument. Reportedly, the Confederate soldier on top of that monument is John Stone. Now, I don't know much about him, but that's how much they thought of him to put him up there. So Miller lost to, I don't think Miller stood a chance in that election. So, in true fashion, what did he do? He took his ball and he went on home. He returned to Mississippi and he raised the 42nd Regiment, Mississippi Infantry at Oxford in Lafayette County on May 14th of 1862. And in 1862, I assure you that the University of Mississippi, the Ole Miss, was already partying in anticipation of winning the national championship in baseball in 2022. Because it's never too early to start a party at Ole Miss. Might put that on a t-shirt. The regiment became part of Joseph Davis's brigade. The new command took part in Longstreet's operation, or siege of Suffolk, in the spring of '63, and the brigade returned to Northern Virginia, where it was placed in Henry Heast's new division. Now, I want you to do this right now. If there's one thing, I don't know if you've picked up this yet, but I haven't showed you a picture of Hugh Reid Miller. Now, I've given you a couple minutes here, and you already should be forming an idea of what do you think he looked like? Picture that. What does he look like? Now, keep that in the back of your head. There is no right or wrong answer. And we'll come out at the end, and we'll see if it matches anything that's close to it. Now, let's jump right into the Gettysburg campaign. This lecture is not about the Battle of Gettysburg. Really, it's more about Hugh Reid Miller. I'm giving you a cursory overview. I know a lot of you want me to go all into the actions that took place, but nevertheless, everybody knows, if you've read something about Gettysburg, that Davis's brigade, this guy's brigade. He ends up losing control of it on the first day's action, and they are subsequently pinned in at the railroad cut, which is between stop number 1 and stop number 2 on the driving tour, if you're trying to place that. Before entering the railroad cut, Hugh Reid Miller was with them, obviously. And how he escapes there, I guess I don't know. I couldn't find anything that any record or anybody noting where he was at the time. If I was a colonel in charge of a regiment stuck in that thing, I would probably try to get on the end so I could see. And so if you're on the end, you're in a good position to get out of there, I suppose, you know. But I'm just guessing. On the third day's action, which is getting to the heart of Hugh Reid Miller, he's in Pickett's charge. And the assault is going to climax at the Bryan farm, which is still extant on the battlefield today. So to give you, get ready, to give you an idea, my pointer doesn't work. I have to walk up here. Here's the Bryan farm, right here, okay? Wow, that's hard. How about that? All right. The smallest things are the best entertainment, I tell you, right here. Confederates start over here, they're going to end up over here. All right, when I start talking, or when Ben's about to talk right here, all this action is taking place between here, the Emmitsburg Road, and over here at the Bryan farm. Right in here. That's the placement. It would be the high water mark stop. And you go right past that, and there'd be the white barn. It'd be over to the left. I've got a picture, I believe, in just a second. Okay, so Hugh Miller goes forward. Let me say one thing before we get some quotes being read here. Joseph Davis, who's in charge, I'm throwing this out. I'm throwing you Gettysburg buffs, battle buffs, a carrot here. It is not clear what exactly happens on Davis' brigade on July 3rd, specifically with Joseph R. Davis, because we don't know where he is. There's only one account, and the account, he's not with them. There is very vague accounts and nothing concrete that Hugh Miller, may have commanded Davis's brigade across the field if Joe Davis is not physically present with them. All right, so put that into the back of your head right here. So I promised you yesterday, if I could, and if you don't know what this cost me to get him here, because I had to go through the whole thing. I promised you yesterday, if all possible, I will get old Ben Lee to come up here and read you some quotes, because y'all haven't seen him in a few years. And if you were at the very beginning of the tour yesterday, I was telling you that Ben is very excited to be taller than his daddy, right here. And so, if you'll come up here, we can see how tall he is right now. All right. Now just stay down there. Right here, okay? All right, so he's about there. He's about there. So Ben's going to read to you right here. I've got some long quotes, and Ben is going to read to you right now about what is going to happen to Hugh Reid Miller, or Hugh Miller, when they get up to the Bryan farm right here. All right.
All right. Ready?
Yeah. Oh, just start at the top.
Is the mic good?
Try it.
What
Talk into it, Delph.
There
you go.
There we go. In the assault that day with Colonel Miller was not one but two of his sons, Eddie and George. George served as Sergeant Major of the 42nd Mississippi, appointed by his father. He was wounded badly in the attack, but managed to make it back to Confederate lines. On July 11th, he wrote his mother of the sad news. All we know of poor father is that he was left supposed to be mortally wounded on the field between the enemy lines and ours. That he said to one of our officers on leaving him, "I'm wounded and I fear mortally." More than this, I cannot hear from anyone, but I fear that the worst is too terribly true. Our poor Eddie stayed with Mr. Witherspoon, chaplain, to try to find him and either him back or at least inter him decently. They've sent me off with the wounded, and I have not heard anything since from them, Ma. God save my poor brothers at least. My dear mother, I entreat you, bear up for the sake of those that are left. Oh, do not give way too much. Do not utterly break down under this terrible blow, or we may not ever see each other again. So where did Colonel Hugh Miller fall? Andrew Cross of the United States Sanitary Commission wrote the following. In a fence corner just above us, among our men, lay Colonel Hugh R. Miller of Pontotoc, Mississippi, an eminent lawyer and judge of that state, shot through the left breast and right knee. We gave him a little wine and a cracker, which he took with great modesty, saying he was not dangerously wounded, but was thankful for our offer to write to his wife. The surgeon told us the case was dangerous. Calling again after a short time, he modestly said, I am very much obliged to you, but give it to those around who are worse and need it more. Miller's other son, Edwin, later wrote his uncle more details, saying that his father fell. He lay in a few feet of a little white frame house on the Emmitsburg Pike Road, some 25 yards from their line of stone fences, together with Captain Magruder, the AA general of our brigade, who died and was buried in a few feet of where he lay.
Ben can read. Yeah, make him a captain. Yeah, make him a lawyer. You get that house right there. Now let's take a moment to back up from what he just said right here and wrap your head around what is occurring right now. Edwin Miller, who I've mentioned was the son of Hugh Miller, or Ben mentioned, with permission, stayed behind after the Confederate Army pulled out and was intentionally captured. He was intentionally gave himself up so he could go into Union lines and try to find his father, because obviously the Bryan farm is in Union lines. And can you imagine that happening in today's world? Now back to his father. The colonel was removed to an unknown Second Corps hospital where he lay under, quote, a large shelter of oilcloths. That's oilcloths. And was treated by a Dr. Mall, M-A-L-L, of the 1st Delaware Infantry. And here he remained until July 8th. During this time, Colonel Miller was doing well, suffered no pain from his wounds. However, Edwin did note, quote, the surgeon told me that secondary hemorrhage was to be feared, but if it did not take place, he would recover. His appetite was very good, and he seemed to enjoy his meals and his smokes afterwards. On July 8th, by his own request, he was moved via ambulance to Gettysburg College, and he stayed there 2 days. And during that time, Edwin heard there was a Southern sympathizer in town by the name of a Mrs. Mary Myers, who lived on Chambersburg Street. This would be about where the restaurants are in the middle of Chambersburg Street in there. The colonel was moved there where he had a more comfortable stay. We think of these hard lines between Pennsylvania, and border states and Maryland. You'd think you'd have both sides. There were a lot of, I don't have a number for you, but there was more than one Southern sympathizer that showed up here in Gettysburg. And they were helping, especially with the Confederate wounded. A lot of them came out of Baltimore and were giving aid to them. But this local lady, Mrs. Mary Myers obviously wasn't from Baltimore, but they're running within the same circle. You have to remember too that Edwin, the son, was probably having a hard time, because if you took in Confederate wounded in your house in a northern town, that could lead to repercussions, social repercussions down the road. So I'm sure that was a big relief to both son and father. During this time, he wrote letters and spoke of recent disasters at Vicksburg and Gettysburg. Colonel Miller often said that, quote, that though we have met with severe reverses to our arms and our present conditions seem very gloomy, yet that he felt as confident as he ever did that in the end, the independence of our country would be established. The condition, quote, the condition of Mississippi seemed to weigh heavily on his mind, and it seemed to oppress him. On July 16th, it all came apart. After a hard cough, Miller began to hemorrhage out of his left lung. Yeah. He began to have pain. Morphine was applied. This seemed to make him more restless. Edwin continued. On the next day, he was seized with another hemorrhage whilst I was giving him a glass of water, and it was almost impossible to stop the flow of blood. He now began to sink rapidly. I put this, as I said at the beginning of the program today, it's a different vein, I can't imagine Ben sitting over here and sitting at my feet right here, and I start bleeding. I mean, can you imagine being in that room right there? And Edwin would write, I saw now that my dear father was passing away, and the tears I could not restrain from falling on his forehead, and it woke him. And the tears on his forehead. And seeing me crying, he put his arm around my neck and said to me, my son, be calm, be quiet. And went back out. Yeah. Isn't that totally like that generation, though, The regimental chaplain was summoned. And that's the last thing. When I found this guy's picture, that was the last thing I thought he looked like. And Mr. T.D. Witherspoon, the two men knew each other. Witherspoon would later write that Miller had been grappling with his belief in Christ, and this made his wife very nervous, and she pressed the Reverend to minister to her husband. The two men subsequently had several conversations, and in the last, according to the Reverend, right before Gettysburg, he professed his faith, but according to the Reverend, quote, he said, but still I feel so unworthy. Witherspoon was summoned to the sick room, and when he entered, Miller's face, quote, brightened up with that joyous smile of his, and evidently summoning all his energies to tell me something which he was anxious to communicate, but his lips were already sealed with death. He couldn't say it. He couldn't tell whatever he wanted to say. He couldn't get it out. Miller tried to write something, but was too weak. Quote, not a moment was to be lost, for the life current was ebbing with every breath. I bent over him, and I whispered in his ear, shall I trust, Colonel, that her prayers are answered, that you died happy, trusting in Christ? A smile spread over the ashy face, and the eyes kindled once more with a glance of intelligence. The lips slightly moved, and the head gently nodded assent. And then the eyes closed, and the pulse almost instantaneously ceased to beat. And over that cold clay lingered the smile which was the last words he ever on earth had awakened. It was 11 o'clock in the morning on July 18th, 1863. Now, this story is about to take an interesting turn. Edwin, as you would think, I mean, this if you noted what Ben was reading to you earlier, this mother, I'm reading between the lines, but I'm pretty sure I'm hitting the nail here. This mother is very worried about her husband and her sons getting killed or maimed in this war. And she's apparently a very nervous person. So much so that the sons know that they're worried about their mother finding out that their father has passed. So couple all that together, and you put the natural grief that's occurring because the boy has just lost his daddy. And, you know, if you get Robert E. Lee to write a letter in the middle of a battlefield with all these casualties, can you imagine what kind of shape Edwin was in to make Lee write that letter? I mean, you have to factor all this in. So that boy really, really, really wants his daddy home. And when I say home, he don't want to leave him among, I don't mean any disrespect, but he don't want to leave him around y'all up here, all right? Or as Lee would say, those people up there. He wants his daddy home. And, quote unquote, kind friends from Baltimore are going to come to the relief. They procured a metallic case. And then, get this, picture this happening in a modern war today. Badgered the camp commandant here at Gettysburg to give permission for parole prisoner Edwin Miller to accompany his father back to the South as a parole prisoner of war. The commandant, whatever happened in there, these ladies, all from Baltimore across the South, and I suppose the host of Miller, they went to the commandant. The commandant wrote a letter to speed their journey, to take with them down to Baltimore. So the party leaves Gettysburg in the middle of the war, and Edwin Miller is dressed in a Confederate uniform in the middle, a toe in a casket. Back home. I mean, it's crazy. With Chaplain T.D. Witherspoon and the mortal remains of Colonel Hugh Miller. Upon arriving at Baltimore, the Union officer was presented the note to General Shinks, if I'm pronouncing that right, adjutant, a Colonel Fish. I couldn't find a picture of him. That's the general, though. And it asked for help. Fish first asked about the whereabouts of the body, and then ordered it to be buried promptly. Of course, the son, Edwin's standing there. This is in some hotel in Baltimore, in downtown Baltimore. And this Union colonel, this adjutant there, is saying, well, just go bury him. And that boy went to pieces once again inside that hotel with this adjutant. And he burst into tears. And so this colonel had mercy on him again. Once again, he gets a break, and the body was instead temporarily placed in a vault. I couldn't find which vault it was. Now, the question became of what to do with Edwin and the chaplain, because you got two Confederates in downtown Baltimore with a dead body. The reply, let them go down to the guard room. Okay? Go down to the guard room. And then they called somebody and said, yeah. All right, so we're going to have Ben come back up here, and he's going to read for us a little bit, because you're just not going to believe this when it goes down. Now, I'm talking about a reverend. They threw the reverend in jail. Now, some of y'all probably, I'm not going to ask anybody, but some of y'all probably been to jail. How many reverends you ever sat by in jail? All right. I'm up here. We're going to start right there.
Right there, and just finish it?
Yeah, go down to here and then keep going. All right.
This?
That's ribaldry, blasphemy,
Yeah.
obscenity. Okay. And then just go to right here. Okay?
So,
Now, yeah.
all right. Now this guardroom was a dark basement of the hotel in which General Shink had his headquarters. Basement of the hotel. Now in this guardroom was a dark... I've lost my place. Now this basement...
Had his headquarters.
Provided with an iron door and small grated window to emit a little light, provided into which the provost guard emptied to the sweeping of the streets.
Let that sink in for him. All right.
Drunken soldiers, deserters, bummers. How do you say that?
That's Latin, and we don't know Latin. All right. Yeah, that's Matt dropped two. Ben doesn't know this, but Matt dropped 2 classes in college. Can you imagine somebody from Mississippi trying to do Latin? Well, there it was. Yeah, yes, sir. So it says something. It's pretty deep, but you aren't gonna know what it is because I don't know how to say it. Right there. All right, constituted right there.
Constituted its ordinary population. Hence the lieutenant was startled by the proposition and said, quote, "But this man is a minister of the gospel. You won't send him there." "Why not?" asked the now irate colonel. "The preachers are more to blame for this war than any others. The best thing we could do is hang a few of them after we capture them." And so without further ado, the iron door swung open and closed behind me, and I found myself in one of the vilest dens in which any respectable man spent the night.
Let that sink in. It's embarrassing for y'all. Embarrassing. Go ahead. Tell them what happened down there.
The ribaldry, blasphemy, obscenity of those poor, half-drunken creatures was horrible. But not only so, there were among the prisoners 1 or 2 stalwart Baltimore roughs, Irishmen whose sympathies were with the South and who, true to the open-hearted instincts of their motherland, were to the arbitrament.
Yeah.
Not arbitrary.
Arbitrament
Of battle. And so every now and then some drunken Federal soldier would cry out amidst the darkness, "I can whip any man who is for Jeff Davis." And from across the room would come an ominous echo out of the darkness, "Hurrah for Jeff Davis." About the center of the room, partaking at first of the character of a fisticuffs between 2 and then of a general melee, with the idea of wherever you see a head, hit it, and a very painful foreboding that your own head might be the next to attract the attention of some accommodating belligerent.
Okay. Which one are you? All right.
I'm Aubrey.
This is Aubrey. At least she just told me right here, okay? Yes, right here. And boy, am I on a steep learning curve here. You better not ever end up in the basement of a hotel in Baltimore, let me tell you. Come here. Real quick, come here. Now, if you think you're seeing double, here's the other one. Which one are you? Speaking to the microphone. No. This is Emma. Right here, all right? And I am trying. What is happening here while this speech is happening is I'm hoping that fisticuffs that Ben just wrote about, I was hoping not to have a reenactment down here for y'all in front. Okay, so after barricading himself with bodies of drunken soldiers, Needless to say, this guy was glad to see the sun come up. And Witherspoon was sent to Fort McHenry, yes, that fort, where he was graciously sent on the first truce boat to Fortress Monroe and to wait. While he's there a day or two, an order arrives before he can make Confederate lines. He's almost home. Before he can make Confederate lines, an order comes from Fort McHenry, and back to Baltimore he goes. Finally, he got exchanged. Why the chaplains and the sergeants were held by the United States government is one of the great mysteries in the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg. But they detained those men. They detained the doctors and the chaplains, basically were medical personnel, at Fort McHenry. And that was not custom, and they didn't like that, to say the least. Carrying a letter from Mrs. Mary C. Magruder, a Southern sympathizer from Baltimore, to a Lieutenant Frank Fauquier, if I'm saying that right, at Fort Monroe, asking this federal lieutenant to expedite the exchange and transfer of Edwin, the chaplain, and his father's remains. So once again, we get lucky. He gets a break. This Southern sympathizer, this lady, knows a lieutenant in Fort Monroe, and she writes a letter, and Edwin presents the letter to this lieutenant, or the chaplain did, and this opens the doors, so to speak, once again. It's crazy. So Edwin gets his parole on July 24th. On the afternoon of July 27th, quote, a stormy day, a cold penetrating rain was rattling the window panes, and 4 figures stood atop a railway platform. That's not it, believe me. A few minutes later, a plain burial case of wood was drawn to the door and transferred to a wagon which was ready to receive it and borne away to the general office of the express company in the city. The case contained all that was mortal of the gallant Colonel Hugh R. Miller. Quote, the casket was too common an occurrence to excite any unusual interest. But standing beside that box, nevertheless, this is not him, by the way, quote, stood a boy of slender form, his neat but almost threadbare uniform of Confederate gray buttoned about him to shield him from the penetrating and pelting rain. The quivering of the lips and the occasional tremor which passed over the tender form, telling of the mute agony of the boy, whose form had stood unflinching amidst all the storm of the 3 days' battle at Gettysburg, but who now found himself unmanned with that thought that he must bear home to his mother at once the tidings of her loss and the fearful confirmation of it. The chaplain is writing this account, by the way. A military funeral was held at this place in Hollywood Cemetery. If I ever get back down, I'm going to Richmond in a couple of weeks. If I have time, I might slip into Hollywood and try to find that. Be neat. The funeral is attended, to give you an idea of who Colonel Hugh Miller was. The funeral is attended by none other than Jeff Davis. Yeah. So he was well known. The funeral was held on July 29th, 1863, as I said, at Hollywood. At the graveside, the Reverend Dr. Moore said the following remarks. He is now to be laid far from the sunny fields of his distant home to repose among strangers until his honored dust can be taken to sleep with that of his kindred. But the memory of his unbending integrity, his unselfish patriotism, and his unfaltering courage shall pass into that common heritage of glory that belongs not to one state or section, but to the whole of that broad land that is now passing through its ordeal of fire. I wish I could do that, right like that. On January 10th, 1864, this is July of 63, In January of 1864, Susan Miller joined him. Her sons were right. She died of a broken heart, died of grief. She traveled to Virginia twice in order to be with her husbands and sons. She died at Sunnyside, I guess that's a home name, in Cumberland County in Virginia. Susan Walton Miller was entombed with her husband at Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, but ultimately the Millers were reinterred in lot number 156 of the Aberdeen City Cemetery in Monroe County, Mississippi. Right there. Yeah. It's pretty neat. Now for the conclusion. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine, how does Hugh Reid Miller look? What are you imagining? There's no right or wrong answer, right? I have one of the great things about working here at Gettysburg National Military Park, as you well know, is that there is no other battlefield that is studied like this. And one of the great things that we have, one of the great assets that we have of this battlefield is the licensed battlefields guides that we have, the LBGs as we call them behind the scenes right here. When I needed a picture of Hugh Reid Miller, I instantly thought of an LBG named Bob Gale, who likes to visit. He is trying to visit every officer's grave from the Battle of Gettysburg, and he has visited a ton. And I said, Bob, man, I said, I need a favor. I won't repeat what he said, but it's not for fair company, but thank you. Yeah, you know Bob, Wayne. But he goes, you know, I think I saw a picture of him. I have to think about that. And only in Gettysburg. You weren't going to get one because I didn't know where it was. I couldn't find it, you know. And he came back to me a week or so, you know, later, and he says, I got it. I knew I'd seen it somewhere. He goes, it's an issue, if I remember correctly, I think I'm right, issue 35 of the Gettysburg magazine. All right, and I said, yes. And I hugged him, which he didn't like, but I felt like it anyway. There he is, right there. Now, does he look like anything like you thought? Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I've often said that the thing about the Battle of Gettysburg is we know so much about the Battle of Gettysburg. It's the stuff we don't know that I'm really curious about. I doubt that this story was repeated. If you can find another tale like this where they actually actively took a body from Gettysburg and got it entombed in the South and in the same month that the Battle of Gettysburg is done, I'd like to hear about it right here. But how many times, my point is, how many times did the story that I just told you play out similarly on so many different levels? And on the North, too. How many of these families were stricken with grief? How many family members how many families were never the same? That's the inherent sadness of Gettysburg. And it's something, I've been here 20 years. It's something that I hope I never lose sight of. That these people were, and I try to drill this in you every time I go out there, that these people were human beings. They were not minions. They're not robots. They're flesh and blood, and they're only human right here. And so therefore, they mourned. They mourned. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much to Matt. We appreciate it. And speaking about white beards, next up in this tent, Chris Gwynn to speak about Twilight of Blue and the Gray, the last reunion of Civil War veterans at Gettysburg. Our own Chris Gwynn, Chief of Interpretation and Education here at the park. Thank you so much, Matt, for a great presentation. We'll give you a half an hour break. If you have not seen the new exhibit, A Rough Course Life, get yourself in there, everybody, to take a look at it. And remember the author signings that are also here. So we'll see you back here in a half an hour.